Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Doc, we can hear you, Doc.
Okay. Can we start? It's already 3 p.m. Okay.
Sige po,
So
Doc.
for this af- okay. So for this afternoon, we'll try to finish the last two topics. But if we run out of time, I'll just send you a recorded lecture on the approach to tremors and other movement disorders. So first off, we talk about coma and related disorders of consciousness. This should be the topic, but I think I'll focus more on coma and then show you how and what to do or how to do the neuro exam in patients with altered sensorium. And meaning not just comatose patients, but those that you might encounter in the clinics or when you are already residents, you patients you encounter at the emergency room or at the ward. So when we say coma, it's when you see a person with deep sleep-like state with eyes closed. However, when you try to wake these patients up, you will not get any response at all. No movements, no eye opening. The patient will not follow commands. You will not be able to take the patient to a level where the patient would be conscious for a while, or be aware of what's happening to himself or to the surroundings. But before we delve into coma further, let us look at the different levels of consciousness. It's because you should be able to identify these important levels of consciousness. So when we say consciousness, it's a state of full awareness of the self and your relationship to the environment. So you are awake and aware. When you're aware, you're able to respond, you're able to follow, you should be able to speak. Okay. So clinically, the level of consciousness is defined operationally at the bedside by the patient's response to you when you examine them. So if you now, me and you right now are awake and aware, and I hope everybody's fully awake and fully aware that you are attending my Zoom lecture. Okay, so you are able to understand what I'm talking. I hope you can digest what I'm talking and you know what's going on. Wherever you are while you're attending the Zoom, you also are aware that someone maybe the dog is barking outside your house. People are talking outside your room. So you are awake and aware of what's happening around the people around you. But when we say drowsy, the patient is in a state where you are able to awaken or arouse that patient. And when you stimulate them and they wake up, to a certain level where they seem to be conscious, I mean, they are conscious and complete possession of their senses. But if you remove the whatever stimulus, no, then that patient will go back to sleep. Or when he is left alone, or when that patient is left alone, then that patient will go back to sleep. Okay. So drowsy can sometimes be misinterpreted or the same as your lethargy, no? But when you say that the patient is confused, your patient may be alert but disoriented. Okay. So when we say stupor, your patient can be brought to a level of awareness. Maybe the patient will open the eyes, but he will not be able to completely be aware of what's happening. So he cannot really respond, no, to the environment. Okay. So usually when you stimulate patients with stupor, you need um, to give a painful stimuli. So compared to patients with drowsy who are drowsy, maybe you can call them, you lightly tap their shoulders, then they may wake up, open their eyes, and be able to answer you. But in patients with stupor, when you apply a painful stimuli, then that those patients may wake up, may open their eyes, but they may only localize. They cannot follow commands, and when you remove your painful stimulus, they will just go back to sleep. So, and what is important is that in patients who are stuporous, it's quite difficult to arouse them, to wake them up. So you may need to give continuous painful stimuli, no, or vigorous stimuli for you to be able to bring these patients to a certain level of wakefulness. But again, that patient is oblivious to what is happening around him, and they can easily go back to a sleep-like state. On the other hand, in patients who are comatose, who are in coma, they are a state of complete loss of consciousness. So no matter what type of stimulus you give them, be it very vigorous, very painful, you will not see any movements, no eye opening, may, no eye opening. No? So the patient has no awareness of themselves, and they will not make any voluntary movements, and they seem to have no sleep wake cycles. So when you go into your clinics, you might be given a patient with altered mental status. So this should not be the same as a patient who's comatose, no? So kasi when we say altered mental status, there are abnormalities of cerebral function. Okay. So strictly speaking, the term altered mental status should imply a change in the level of consciousness. Okay. So awake, they are alert and aware, drowsy. They can be easily arousable. When you say stupor, they can only be awakened by vigorous or painful stimuli. So this is now your levels of consciousness. So what are the other states that can probably mimic your coma or a patient who's comatose? One is when a patient is in a vegetative state. They seem to be awake. So they appear awake, but they do not respond to you. They will not follow any response. Okay. And then, but you can see them yawning, they can swallow, their head moves. But when you look through their eyes, I mean, when the patient tries, seemingly is looking at you, there is actually no regard. Okay. And you may actually see associated findings like they can have decerebrate posturing, they have absent response to visual stimuli. So even if their eyes are open, when you try to um, give a stimulus, they will not blink. So there is no visual threat in these patients. Another state that can actually mimic coma is your minimally conscious states. Compared to coma and to your vegetative state, this minimalist conscious state, they carry a better prognosis. They have dramatic recovery. Usually it is said, I think, around 12 months. And in these patients, they may have suffered a cardiac arrest or cerebral hypoperfusion, or there can have been a head trauma. So in patients with minimally conscious state, there can be rudimentary vocal or motor behaviors. They can be they can have spontaneous, or they can be spontaneous or in response to touch, visual stimuli or command, meaning they have visual threat. You can see movements, no. So they have better response, or they have better prognosis. Okay. So the possibility of incorrectly attributing meaningful behavior to patients who are in vegetative state and minimally conscious state would really create inordinate problems and anguish for families. So the question whether that patients so the question here is we is there a lack of capability to recognize no which of the two is actually the patient is in. So you need a functional MRI to be able to distinguish. Okay. Now there are also other no syndromes that can be interpreted as stupor or coma. So vegetative state, like I mentioned earlier, they can be partially or fully in a fully awake state, but remains immobile or mute. Okay, and the damage in the brain are seen in the medial thalamic nuclei or frontal lobes, or when they have extreme hydrocephalus, like for example, in patients who have central nervous system infections like tuberculous meningitis and who has been untreated, so they may develop extreme hydrocephalus. So you may see in these patients now they may form some impression expressions. So, but normally they just are have open eyes, they seem awake, but they will not be able to speak or follow whatever commands you give to them. Next is abulia. So this is a milder form of akinetic mutism, and these are usually characterized by mental and physical slowness with diminished ability to initiate activity. So the damage are usually seen in the medial frontal lobes and their connections. Now, patients who are catatonic are seen to be hypomobile, meaning very minimal movements, and they will not speak, so they are mute, but they can make few voluntary or responsive movements. So you can see eyelid elevation is resisted, but blinking can be seen, and the eye movement can be seen also with head movement. So there are signs that this patient is seen to be responsive. No, like I said, there can be elevation of the eyelids. There can be um, I mean, there is resistance to passive eye opening. So when you elevate the eyelids, no, and when they do recover, the patient may have memory of events that actually occurred, but during that point in time, they're not able to communicate. Okay, so patients who are in locked-in syndrome, um, parang pwede natin siya sabihin it's like a pseudocoma, no, in which the awake patient has no means of producing speech or volitional movements, limb movements, meaning the patient is actually aware and awake, but cannot move extremities, cannot move the head. The only thing he can actually do is the voluntary vertical eye movements and lid elevation. So when you encounter this patient, when you ask them, you can tell them like, if the answer to my question is yes, blink once. If the answer to my question is no, blink twice. And they can actually do that. And the most common cause of this lock-in syndrome is usually a stroke in your brainstem. Okay? Because all your corticospinal tract, like I said, from the cerebral cortex, it will run through the brainstem. And so in brainstem tumors, the tracts, the corticospinal tracts, all of the descending motor pathways are actually affected. So meaning all your limbs cannot move. The patient cannot even smile. So what is retained is just the opening of the eyes. The patient can actually elevate the lid, can make vertical eye movements. So in my test, if I ask you which of the following has um, weakness of all extremities, cannot speak, but is aware and can only make voluntary vertical eye movements, then that should be locked-in syndrome. Now, there are also other differentials that you can probably encounter, no? That would mimic patients with coma um, or a stupor-like state. So GBS is your Guillain-Barré syndrome. In these patients, though the ones that are severe are the ones that seem to be comatose. So they will experience ascending weakness until they are not able to move their face. There is facial diplegia. They cannot put their tongue out. They may be intubated. No, they can blink their eyes, but they are not able to communicate. So in critical illness polyneuropathy, these are seen in patients that have been chronically sick. No, these are the patients that we might see in the ICU who's been there for several months. Probably initially they may have had cardiac arrest or severe pneumonia, and then eventually the nerves are affected, and we call it critical illness polyneuropathy. The long nerves to the extremities and the short nerves to your upper extremities are the ones affected. And of course, patients who's had pharmacologic neuromuscular blockade, then they may, sent like patients who's comatose. So since we talk about coma, we should be able to understand the pathway of waking up. So you read on the ascending reticular activating system. So this your ARAS or your ascending reticular activating system, there are clusters of neurons that run through the core of your brainstem. So this is the one that I'm talking about, and they are involved in maintaining the brain to be alert. So they are the ones that controls your arousal or your wakefulness and the sleep-wake cycle. So it also controls the visceral functions like the heart rate and the vomiting. So when I try to explain to my to the relatives, no, who has patients who are comatose and about to die, so I tell them that ang sentrohan aton utok, which controls parang switch na aton kinabuhi. Pag on, we are awake, we are alert, we are conscious. But if it's off, then we are comatose. We cannot respond, we cannot move. No, even our heart rate, no, pwedeng affected. They can bradycardia or they can go into cardiac arrest. Okay? So these areas are the important ones to again to maintain alertness and coherence of thought. So when there is structural damage or suppression of the reticular activating system, then we go or fall into coma. So let me remind you, no, that sometimes it's not just going into cardiac arrest and then we go into hypoxic ischemic encephalopathies that our patients will go into coma. But remember that our brain is encased by that rigid skull, okay? And remember the one I hope you already heard in your physiology about the Monroe Kelly, no, phenomenon wherein what is inside the intracranial vault are always, it has to be maintained at the same percentages. For what is inside your cranium is only your brain, the blood that flows into your brain, and of course your your CSF, your cerebrospinal fluid. Remember also that your brain is divided by your falx cerebri and your tentorium cerebri, such that when you have a big mass on one side that will push one of the brain to the other side, so they will be maiipit sila because you have this tentorium cerebelli and the falx cerebri. So again, the brain is divided, the cranium is divided, the cranial cavity is divided by compartments of this because of these enfoldings, your tentorium or your falx cerebri. So the two cerebrum are separated by the falx cerebri, the supratentorial and infratentorial by the tentorium cerebelli. So these are the important things that you have to remember. And also that you have the anterior cranial fossa, you have the middle cranial fossa, and the posterior cranial fossa. So if you have cerebral lesions that's so big that it will cause herniation, then the patients can also go into stupor and coma. So when we say herniation, there is displacement of the brain tissue by an overlying or adjacent mass into a contiguous compartment that it usually does not occupy. For example, you have this big mass. Okay, first, here is your midline. the right brain stays on the right, the left brain stays on the right because it's divided by your falx cerebri. But if you have this big mass, it will push your left brain, so you can have subfalcine herniations, midline shifting, no, and even descent, no, transtentorial herniation. Okay, so let us discuss the different herniation syndromes. So one is the transtentorial herniation that I mentioned earlier. This is displacement of your brain tissue by an adjacent mass intact on tedious compartment that it normally does not occupy. So ang transtentorial is this one going down so that the brain may pass through the cisterna magna. There can be cerebellar tonsillar herniation as well. And there can be uncal herniations, while there can be cingulate or subfalcine herniation. When you have uncal herniation, there is impaction of the anterior temporal gyrus into the temporal opening just anterior to and adjacent the midbrain. This one. Okay. So what will you see in these patients? You may see anisocoria. So when we say anisocoria, one pupil is dilated compared to the other. So for this one, because the mass is the subdural hematoma is on the left side and it causes uncal herniation on the left side, then what will happen is that the left pupil will be dilated. So it's ipsilateral to the lesion. And this can be the first sign of an increased ICP. Okay. Next is a central transcentorial herniation. So there is symmetric downward movement of the thalamic, which is usually over here, structures through the dentorial opening with compression of the upper midbrain. So your upper midbrain is here. So what will we see? Initially, there can be myotic pupils. The patients can be very drowsy. So this can be your warning signs, or these are the signs that heralds the transtentorial herniation. So there can be progressive compression of the brainstem, and of course your ARAS. So because also there is uncal herniation. So what will happen when you see these patients? They can be restless. They can have, they can be restless but drowsy, and then they will eventually have respiratory problems. Okay, but the respiratory centers are usually spared until late into the herniation syndrome. But you will see them going into coma already. And then eventually, so from myotic pupils, it can become dilated. Okay, and then you will see anisocoria and then respiratory depression. Next is your transfalcial herniation. So this is displacement of your cingulate gyrus under the falx and across the midline. So this is your subfalcine herniation. So maybe in subfalcine herniation, what your patients may only have headache, they can be very drowsy, but you may not see the myotic pupils or the anisocoria. So there can also be foraminal herniation, which is now the downward forcing of your cerebellar tonsils into the foramen magnus. It may start off as a central transcentorial herniation, and then eventually uncal herniation happens, and then eventually this downward cerebellar movement becomes your foraminal herniation. So when you already have this, you will have compression of your medulla, which is now which has your respiratory centers. So these patients may go into respiratory arrest and eventually they may die. Okay, let's skip that one. Okay. This is a CT scan of a patient with subdural hematoma, and you see already movements of the right brain to the left. Remember that when you eventually look at your CT scans, you look at the skull, are there fractures? And then you look at the midline. Diba? Para mang twin, no? The right and the left brain are twins. So you already see here the body of your ventricle. The right ventricle is already it has already crossed the midline. So, okay? Parang nagkamali yata. Anyways, so the more common causes, the most common cause of coma are usually from metabolic problems. For example, patients with hypoglycemia, 30 na lang ang sugar nila or 10, 20. We do see this at the ER. Or patients who's into diabetic ketoacidosis, super taas naman ng sugar nila. So they may go into coma also. Okay? So why does metabolic disorders cause comatose or coma in patients? Because they will disrupt the delivery of the energy substrates. They have nothing to do with wala kang makikitang renations in metabolic problems. But when you do check these patients, you will not see anisocoria, comatose patients that are stuporous patients that are moving their extremities, walang laterality, walang focal deficits, no? So that's what they will do. So there can be decrease in the cerebral blood flow. And you have to remember that the normal cerebral blood flow is 50 grams per 100-gram brain tissue per minute. And when you do have decreasing cerebral blood flow, then you can end up with strokes as well. So let me remind you that the capacity of the brain to provide energy is just 2 minutes. So after blood flow is interrupted and the oxygen stores will last for about 8 to 10 minutes. So you can also see epileptic comas. These are in patients who go into status epilepticus. Okay. So let's go to the approach to the diagnosis of patients with coma. So first, very important is the history. You ask for the circumstances and the rapidity of the development of the neurologic symptoms. So you ask, para nahiya kaadlaw nagkikinaturog or how did it start? So maybe the relatives will tell you, Doc, it started with she was still talking last Tuesday, and then we noted on Wednesday that she was like she likes to just sleep on her bed or preferred lying down, although she was still conversant, but she was sleeping most of the time. Then eventually we couldn't wake her up anymore. Or we noted that probably yesterday she was still walking, but she was dragging her leg and the right hand when she holds onto objects, nahuhulog ang mga kingkakapan. Siguro then that patient was having a stroke or if the patient, for example, had a history of chronic headache and then all of a sudden develop ano ba, drowsiness, eventually naging stupor and then naging coma, then probably that patient had, in the absence of a fever, then probably that patient had a brain tumor that bled, kaya naging very sudden and onset. No? So very important to ask for antecedent symptoms. And what are the chronic illnesses that your patient has? For example, a patient who's 55 was atrial fibrillation and maintained on warfarin but has not sought consult with his cardiologist, no, or internist for the last several months. So no proper test for ProTime and APTT were done. So you would be thinking, mas bangin prolonged na ang iya ProTime, then maybe there was bleeding in the brain. Or for example, diabetic, if you ask, has she been taking her meds? For example, no. And then when you see the patient is diaphoretic, the patient has is tachypnic and is stuporous, then and then when you check the sugar, 500 na. So, bakit nagda-diabetic ketoacidosis? So, very important is the history. Like we always say, when you do a good history, you get the diagnosis in any 85% of cases. So, the history will give you that. So, these are the different differentials no, for patients who are comatose. Just read your Harrison's. Okay, how do we go about the neurologic exams? Because this is now important in patients with coma. So you don't go through Of course, you cannot check already for cranial nerve 1 for anosmia kasi comatose non-emo patient or stuporous. So these are the things that you just need to assess. So the details of your neurologic exam in the various states of disordered consciousness necessarily vary with the degree of impairment and the depth of coma. Pero ang mas importante that you check when you do your neuro exam in patients with altered level of consciousness or depressed level of consciousness. So number one, of course, you check, ano ba, comatose or stuporous, or is the patient just drowsy? And what are the pupils? Is it what number one, when you open the patient's eyes, is it midline on primary gaze, or is one or both eyes looking to the left side or away from the hemiparetic side? You look at, is it isochoric? Are they reactive to pupillary light? When you shine light to the pupils, and then you look at the pupillary, the eye movements. Okay, and you should do fundoscopy, especially in those with complaints of sudden severe headache, then loses consciousness and becomes stuporous. They may be having subarachnoid bleeds. Then you look at the motor status. Is the patient moving all extremities? Is it spontaneous, purposeful movements, nangangalot, trying to move the bado or tugging on the taklap, no? So, um, those are how you assess motor status of patients. Therefore, in patients with altered sensorium, your manual muscle testing or your motor assessment will no longer be reported as 5/5. So, wrong agad yan, no? So dapat how you will report it is noted with preferential movements on the right, upper, and lower extremities, which are purposeful, but the left, upper, and lower extremities are noted to withdraw to pain. So because we need to always compare the right and the left. So if you see that difference, ang left nangangalot, no, able to raise, no, when you raise the hand, pwedeng mag-steady. So meaning, may tone, may strength. Then you describe what you see. Compared to the left, now will only move with application of pain. So you know that there is left hemiparesis. And what are the reflexes? And you check for meningeal signs. Okay. Remember that one of the most often cause again of coma is metabolic process or trauma. Okay. So in almost all metabolic problems, your patient's pupils are midline, the eyes are midline on primary gaze, the pupils are briskly reactive, and there is symmetry, no, of your neuro exam findings. So they ma-move ang tanan. But any asymmetry in motor or sensory reflexes or your pupillary size and reflexes should prompt again immediate search for structural disease. You only get focal deficits pag may structural problem. So how do we test the level of consciousness? Okay, before I'll use in another slide, no, which I usually use to teach the residents. So I will use this to run you through how you check patients with altered sensorium, be it drowsy, be it stupor, be it coma. Okay? Because in patients with altered sensorium, if you have 10 patients with altered sensorium, like one or two will just have coma. Okay, and iba very drowsy or drowsy. One might be stuporous, no? So let me give you this lecture also. So in patients with altered sensorium, a swift evaluation is important so that you can safeguard the patient's life. We cannot dilly-dally We should do our history while looking at your patient, while doing a focused neuro exam on your patients because we do not have time to spare. Okay? So, very important when you see patients at altered sensorium is you should be able to rule out trauma. Trauma, Anay. Always ask for trauma and then you ask the chronic history. So, you may see important clues to the cause of consciousness or altered mentation. Like what are the signs of head trauma? The bilaterally black eyes. You call it raccoon eyes. Or when you do otoscopy, you might see blood, no, behind the tympanic membrane or behind the mastoid bone. And before you examine again the neck, before you do any maneuvers on your neck, you should be able to make sure again that that patient has not had any head trauma or brain trauma or trauma for that matter. Kay bangin may da niya neck fracture, then you will cause the death of that patient. So if you are not sure, if the relatives are not sure, better safe than sorry, put on a cervical collar on those patients. Okay? So you examine the neck. If you're sure, then you can that there is no trauma. Patient had not had any trauma, and then you examine the skin also, and you examine for pressure source or bulle. This should be bulle. Why do we look for source or bulle? Because the relatives may tell you, Dok, kakulop man la ito. But you've seen already bulle and source. That means to say that patient has been lying on his back. For example, you say sacral ulcers, and that patient has been lying on his back for quite a while for him to have developed the pressure source. Okay? So, important clues. And then, so after you've done your history, it's important to determine the intensity of the stimulation necessary to elicit a response. So, how do we go about it? You should be able to check the quality of the response. Okay. So, I've mentioned this earlier already that these are the more common ways that you should um, label your patients with altered sensorium. So, one is that you can do the good behavior as seen through the four glands. So, is there normal breathing and nasopharyngeal reflexes? Meaning, what you can elicit there is your cranial nerves 9, 10, and 11. And you can check for the pontomedullary reticular formation and the cervical and the thoracic spinal cord. Or if you see blinking and tonic closure of the eyes, then you're checking for cranial nerve 5 and cranial nerve 7. If there's random, slow conjugate drifts of the eyes to the sides, so normally when a patient has altered sensorium but no structural problems, you may see, even if the eyes closed, you may see the eyes moving like this. Nag-uupod, conjugate. Okay? So you are able to check for cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6, even if that patient doesn't follow commands. Di rin nakakasunod. Look this way, look up. But if you see in patients with altered sensorium and you see these roving movements of the eyes, you know that your cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6 are actually probably intact, still intact. Okay? And even your entire pontine tegmentum and the frontopontine pathways. Okay. So this is just one of the ways. The fourth thing is when you say random, spontaneous, particularly semi-purposeful symmetrical movements of all extremities, then you know na the corticospinal tract is intact. Like in patients that are, um, for example, hypoglycemic, that they comatose, they are just supers, then you may see them having some movements that are equal. You know that the corticospinal tract is intact. There is most likely no structural abnormalities. One way also of checking for the level of consciousness, nagli-lecture pa si mama. Go play with nanay man outside. Okay? Thank you, baby. Yeah, your baby, okay? I'll see you later. Mama's still doing a lecture. Okay, come here. You say hi to them. Okay, you say hi. You say hi. 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 Okay, go, go. Thank you, Mom. Okay, thank you, baby. So your GCS or your Glasgow Coma Scale, this was actually first made for patients with head trauma. Okay. But eventually, neurology also adopted, no? Kasi parang we all agree, we all know what is a GCS. So when you tell me what is the GCS, then I can imagine the patient status even if I have not examined that patient. So this is just a rough grading system so that you can assess the patient's eye response, the motor response, and the verbal response. No, either they can localize, they can follow, or no response at all. So you have to remember that the patient may be GCS 12 at 11 a.m., but they can also deteriorate later. For example, when you went back to that patient, then when you reassess that, the GCS was already just probably 10 or 9 or 8 or even lower. Okay. So how do we go about checking the Glasgow Coma Scale? First, we check the eye opening. So GCS, the perfect score is 15. The lowest score is 3. Wala pong zero na score. Let's go back. Wala pong zero na score because the lowest that you can grade per eye opening or motor response or verbal response is 1. So the lowest score is 3. The best response is 15. So the patient may have spontaneous eye opening. Then the score is 4. But if when you see the patient, the eyes are open, then when you try to call that patient, he opens his eyes and then be able to respond, then that patient has a score of 3 for eye opening. Or maybe like if the patient does not respond to calling his name, or telling him to open his eyes, then maybe you can do tapping as well, mataanay, mataanay. Then the patient opens his eyes, then probably that is still just 3 and score. But if the patient only opens the eyes to pain, then the score is 2. If really there is no response despite vigorous and painful stimuli, then the score is 1. Okay, remember this. You have to make necessary attempts, several attempts to awaken your patient, to arouse the patient. So, when you give painful stimuli, wag automatically na masakit hinduro. So, maybe, mas lang, guti eye, a little pinch on the nail beds, tapos getting firmer, or you do retrosternal knob na vigorous, but you don't apply vigorous retrosternal knob rub yun, no? Kasi bangin draw sila, mag-iisog. Ano ba? Maululita doctor. So it's quite painful. So, that's how to do it, no? So, if you have to give vigorous and painful stimuli, these are the 4 areas where you can actually apply them. Supraorbital ridge, the nail beds, and the mastoid here. Okay? The temporomandibular joint, the mastoid. Okay? And a retrosternal rub. Okay? So, or top anay. Okay, top. So, it's when I was in training, there was a resident in surgery na because he couldn't awaken his patient, he slapped the patient. So he ended up nag-complain and family. So we don't slap our patients. Diri kita nakutol, no? We don't pinch the skin unless what we're trying to check is abduction or adduction of the limbs. But if you're just trying to see if you can awaken the patient or if the patient will localize, then these are the areas where you can just try to give stimulus. So again, it is best you give a modest lateralized stimulus, compression of the nail beds, or on the supraorbital ridge, no? Kasi the patient may lateralize. Or if they don't respond, for example, you applied pain, pressure on the supraorbital ridge, but all you got was parang grimace. But when the patient grimaced, pantay man. Pero when you tried retrosternal rub na vigorous, the patient's right hand tried to remove your hand. So that is localizing. Or when you applied pressure on the supraorbital ridge and the patient attempted to remove your hand, then that is localizing. The patient, tapos what if the right only localized, the left did not move? Then you know that the left is weaker than the right because the right tried to remove the hand that was giving the painful stimuli. So again, eye-opening to spontaneous is 4, to speech or light tapping is 3, to pain is 2, and if there's no response, it's 1. So again, it's necessary to make reasonable attempts to arouse your patient, to awaken your patient, and this usually includes eventually assessing response to painful stimulus. Then next is verbal response. So for example, you saw the patient open his eyes with vigorous tapping on the shoulders, continuous tapping. Then you try to ask, even if the eyes are closed, what is your name? What year is it? Okay, what year is it? For example, if the patient said, you ask, what year is it? And then he said, 1983. Pero supposedly, and date na is and the year is 2026, and that patient is confused. Okay. But for example, he said, what year is it? And the answer was June. Then that is inappropriate because the response is not within the context of your question. The context is year, diba? What year? So numbers, but he gave you month. So that is inappropriate. Okay. So, or he just makes incomprehensible sound, then the score is 2. And if there's really no response, then if he groans or screams or you cannot understand what he's talking, the score is 2. And if there's no response, then the score is 1. Now, again, I would like to emphasize that it is necessary to make reasonable attempts, no, so that you can awaken your patient. So in motor responses, so, for example, the patient opened eyes to name calling, and then you ask him, um, what is the year today, and he's able to answer 2026. And when you ask him, show me your two fingers, so he's able to follow commands. Or lift your eyes. Kung nag-open lift your hands. If nag-open an eyes, okay, close your eyes again. So if he follows, then that obeys, and then that's 6. Pero for example, you don't get any response, then you attempt to apply stimulus that can elicit a lateralized response. So in the supraorbital ridge, in the nail beds, for example, you applied pain on the supraorbital ridge, but no response. Then the patient did not attempt to remove your hand. Then you try to um, do retrosternal rub. Wala pa din. Then you pinch the nail beds and then it withdraws to pain. Look at the right and the left. Does the left withdraws to pain more briskly than the right? If it does, then there is weakness on the right. So that's lateralized. Okay, so by doing that, you will be able to see probably where the problem is. But if you're gonna score the motor response, if the patient localizes, that is fine. For example, you did a retrosternal rub. The patient tried lifted his hand but did not reach her hand to remove it, but crossed the midline, parang sumugad labahiya. That is still trying to localize. Okay? If not, then you apply pain on the nail beds, and if withdraws, then the score is 4. Or if you see posturing responses, there is extensor response. This is the cerebrate, and abnormal flexion response, then this is the corticate. So the corticate is better than the cerebrate. So if the corticate, the score is 3. If extensor response or decerebrate, the score is 2 for the motor response. And if no responses at all, then the score is 1. Like I said, the GCS was made for trauma patients. So in urology, may danagihap. We call it the force scale, the full outline of unresponsiveness scale, which will check the eye opening, the eye response, the same as your GCS, but here you have zero score. Okay, so 4 if the eyelids open to command or blinks to command, eyelids open but not tracking, meaning does not follow you, then the score is 3. If the eyelids are closed but open to loud voices, then the score is 2. If it opens to painful stimuli, the score is 1. If no response, the score is 0. Motor response, for example, the patient can just do a thumbs up or the peace sign. The score is 4. If he attempts to localize, like what we did on the GCS, the score is 3. If there's flexion response or decorticate, 2. Extension response, decerebrate, 1. No response is 0. What is good with the 4 scale is that you also test for the brainstem reflexes. You check for the pupils and the corneals. You check if one pupil is wide and fixed compared to the other, if the pupil or corneal reflexes are absent, if both are absent, or talagang pati ang cuff reflex is absent. And you also check for the respiration. Okay. So the total score here is 0, 16, and best. Okay. Okay. Respiration. We already talked about the level of consciousness, no? And then we'll now talk about the respiration. Now, although this is the least less localizing value in comparison to the brainstem signs, it's still important because it might give you a clue where now in the brainstem is the problem. So you watch for spontaneous respiration. If you do, then you know that the respiratory center is not yet affected that much. Or if there is irregularity of respiratory patterns. So, for example, what you see is the Kind-Stokes respiration. It's a pattern of periodic breathing with phases of hyperpnea. So, ito po yung hyperpnea alternating with an apnea. So, it will start with slow and then the patient becomes tachypnic and then eventually nagsuslow down ang breathing and then nag-apnea. So, we see this usually, the Kind-Stokes breathing, we see this in the um, it results from an interplay of normal brainstem respiratory response, no? And the medullary chemosensory, I think it's chemosensory circuits are still adequate, are receiving adequate oxygen and carbon dioxide, okay? So it's a sign. So your Kind-Stokes breathing is mainly a useful sign that the brainstem is still brainstem respiratory reflex center are still intact even if the patient may have forebrain impairment. Now, what if the patient is really very tachypnic lang? So we call it central neurogenic hyperventilation. And this is seen most commonly in patients with metabolic encephalopathies, but we rarely see these in cases of high brainstem tumors. So apneustic breathing, apneusis, no? It consists of inspiratory pauses and usually seen in bilateral pontine lesions. Okay? So he expires, he exhales, then apnea, exhales, then apnea. So the apnea is at the full inspiration. Then you can have irregular or gasping or ataxic breathing. And you know that this is already in the upper medulla. And pag wala na talaga siyang breathing, doesn't breathe at all, for example, your patient is hooked to a ventilator, then the ventilator is the one breathing for that patient, then you don't know that your medulla has already been affected, the respiratory center has already been affected. You also need to check if there is hemiplegia. Franny, up to what time kita pwede?
Until 5, Doc.
Wait lang ha. I'll ask kung nag-start na hira. Okay. Right. Okay. So you've tested the level of consciousness. You've tested for you've checked the respiration. Now you check, is there hemiplegia? Is there a focal deficit? Okay. So because if there is hemiplegia, then you know there is a structural problem in the brain. So you check for asymmetry of movements, like what I've been talking earlier. Look at the posture, the tone, and or is there flaccidity of the muscles or flaccidity of the cheeks. So we can check for eyelid release test and a lid dropping test. Sometimes we do this if we ang tawag dyan, if we suspect na mamalinggiring. I've encountered a lot na parang comatose pero autosats are okay, BP are okay, sugars are okay, CBGs are okay, electrolytes are okay, but it seemingly doesn't wake up. So we check for these ones, no? So how do we go about it? So you position yourself at the back of the patient's head. So while standing at the patient's head, you can elevate both eyelids, no? Then simultaneously release them. Kung malinggiring, masaray to dayon. Okay? So you have to look for asymmetry. One closes immediately, the other does not. Then you know that there is weakness on the other side. So that's one way of checking for asymmetry. In malingering patients, for example, when you do the limb dropping test, so again, you are at the back of the patient's head while the patient is supine. You lift both hands, or when you lift both hands, you look at the hands. Ano sa naigbaw, ano sa nasagad. Okay, so you know that there is already weakness here. For example, lift it up, pareho sa ganang position. So there's symmetry. But when you let it fall, one side may fall less. I mean, one side falls fast, goes back to the bed again. Then you know na that side is weaker. That goes true for the legs as well. So these are the limb dropping tests. So this is wrist dropping, this is arm dropping test, and this is the leg dropping test. Now, we check for the brainstem signs. We check for the pupils. We need to see, number one, if there's no eye opening, you open the patient's eyelid and you check what is the primary gaze. If it's midline, or one eye is deviated, or both eye is deviated, or both eyes are looking down. If it's midline, then dapat amoy ito. Yeah, that's the normal. Okay. So how do you do pupillary check for the pupillary size? So you shine light on the right side and it constricts. That's direct light reflex. When the other eye constricts, then that's consensual eye reflex. It's not only important to look at the constriction, but how briskly the pupils also constricts. So that is your pupillary responses. Okay? Diba I said earlier, in awake patients with no neurologic abnormalities, one eye can be bigger than the other. And we see it in 8 to 10%. I think 10% of normal individuals. Okay. You can also pinch the skin on the neck or face, and then one pupil will dilate by 1 to 2 millimeter because you're trying to check for the run of your sympathetic trunk to the superior ganglion to the dilator pupillae. Okay. This is an example of the bulbospinal response. So the pain stimulus arises from the trigeminal or the spinal dorsal horn. It ascends, like I said earlier, to the autonomic control areas, to the superior cervical ganglion, which is in C8 to T1, and goes to it will go to the dilator pupillae, and then it will dilate the eyes, your pupils. So when you check this, you check for symmetry. How fast? An usaba na dilate an usadiri. So again, in comatose patients, you may see them having roving eye movements. I hope you can see the roving eyes now. Okay. So usually that is what we call conjugate horizontal roving. So these are spontaneous eye movements that are still seen in comatose patients who are not yet brain dead. So you observe the eyes in its resting position and the spontaneous movements. So when you open their eyes, you can see this. So that's roving eye movements. Okay. So this will tell you that the midbrain and the pons are still intact. Okay, di ba? 3, 4, 6, midbrain and pons. Okay. So when you check for ocular movements, you also check, is the eyes looking towards the side of the lesion, meaning away from the uh, side of the weakness, or is it looking towards the side of the weakness? Or is there ocular bobbing? Is there ocular dipping? Okay, so these are movements that you may see. That's not like, okay. So when you say ocular bobbing, brisk downward movement and slow upward movement of the eyes. Going down, brisk downward, and going up is slow. So that's ocular bobbing. Usually, what is affected is the uh, pontine area. No? Usually, there is stroke or and thrombosis of the basilar artery. In comparison to ocular dipping, slow going down, but you see the faster up movements. Ocular dipping, ocular bobbing. The wrong way eyes separate. They go opposite ways. So how do you check for corneal reflexes? You check if the eye blinks in response to touching the cornea, not the sclerae, but the cornea. If no response, then that is an absent corneal reflex. When you check for corneal reflex in patients whom you think are already, we usually check this now. If we think we're trying to elicit if there are still brainstem responses because the patient might already be brain dead. Okay, so we actually test for that. Now we test for all the brainstem responses, and if there are none, then we declare that patient brain dead. When the patient is brain dead, dead na po siya, kahit may heart rate po siya. Okay? So, you you touch the cornea, not the sclerae. Then we also do oculocephalic or Dall's eye reflex. So make sure that you don't have neck trauma, ha? Okay? So you briskly move the head side to side. Normal is that the eyes will move to remain fixated in position. So opposite the head turning. So if you turn the head to the right, the eyes move to the left. But if you turn the patient's head side to side and the pupils or the eyes remain in the midline, then that is already an absent Dall's eye reflex. Okay? I hope you understood that. So now we're going to check for the vestibulo-ocular reflex. So when we do this, make sure that the ears are clean, the cerumen have been removed. Tapos, you elevate the head of the bed to 30 degrees to bring the horizontal semicircular canal, which is in the um, ears, no, in a vertical position so that there can be response, no. So we usually use ice cold water. So we administer a 50 cc ice cold no water to one ear to the patient's ear. You can wait for 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes for a response. And then you can see this. There is nystagmus. So the eyes are moving left, right, left, right. It tells you that the cortex, the cerebral cortex is intact. The brainstem is also intact. And then you check on the opposite side as well. Okay. You wait for 10 minutes until this has stopped, and then you transfer to the other side. So what if the cortical response is already absent? So when you give 50 cc of ice cold water, that ice will go and look to the side where you have irrigated with the ice cold water. But still the brainstem is intact. So parang doll's eye, opposite of the doll's eye. Okay? But if both brainstem and the cerebral cortex are absent, then after irrigating the ears with ice cold, 50 cc of ice cold water, the eyes will remain fixed in the middle. So that is now an absent vestibulo-ocular reflex. Okay? Now, we also check for the gag or the cuff reflex. In patients who are intubated, you may just tug on the ET and you might get a gag, or before they would stick that tongue depressor and touch the pharyngeal arches. But we don't do that anymore. We just tug on the ET or we do suctioning and then we see if the patient will cough. Sometimes even if you just tug on the ET, they will start gagging or coughing. Then you know that your medulla is still intact. Okay? But if no response, then absent gag or cough reflex. Now, for example, though brainstem signs already, pupils are fixed dilated, no respiration, no spontaneous movement, GCS3 unpatient. We do, we actually do apnea test to just prove to the family that the patient is already brain dead. So we prepare this patient, make sure the temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, the BP is 100 degrees, at least 100 millimeters mercury. If lower on blood pressure, you can give vasopressors, you can blue fluid resuscitation. Then you adjust the ventilator, 100% FiO2 for at least 30 minutes. And then the tidal volume, you maximize. The respiratory rate on the ventilator is 6 to 10. Then you get an EBG. Dapat normal pa ang EBG niya. Okay? So if these prerequisites are absent, you don't proceed to do the apnea test. Okay? So once you've done all the prerequisites, you remove the patient from the ventilator. You can so you administer oxygen. So this is an apneic oxygenation because your patient is no longer breathing. Ideally, you put in that cannula up to the level of the carina. And then you oxygenate the patient for 10 minutes. So what is now an apnea test? If it's positive, so while you're doing the apnea test, you should be able to maintain the patient with a BP of 100. Pag nag-95, you stop. Okay. Be able to maintain the systolic BP up to 100. The oxygenation should be at least 91 and above. So if after 10 minutes you don't see a chest rise, you don't see the patient taking a breath, you do an EBG and the CO2 is so elevated, then that is a positive apnea test. But while you're doing the apnea test and you see the patient take a breath, guminhawa, stop that apnea test, you hook the patient back to the ventilator because now that's a negative apnea test. So the patient is still not brain dead. Okay. So going back to we'll skip this because we have mentioned this already. Ah, eto, wala pala to doon, no? So sometimes, just by looking at the pupils, you will know where in the brain, with what level in the brainstem is the problem. Okay? So if it's reactive and small, it's diencephalic. If diencephalic, you can see the Kind-Stokes breathing also. If it's midbrain, there is already uncal herniation, then one eye is dilated, ipsilateral to the problem. Okay? Or fixed dilated bilateral, fixed mid position, then still midbrain. Okay? Or people if the pupils are pinpoint, then that is automatically a pontine localization. Okay? So, we done that. So what are the diagnostic procedures that you may actually do in these patients? You've, aside from doing the basic, like checking for ketones, if you're thinking of DKA, the electrolytes, the thyroid functions, um, then you can also do EEG to check maybe the patient has non-convulsive status epilepticus, especially if all the other tests seemingly are normal. And you can see that non-convulsive status epilepticus, you need to do neuroimaging studies, be it CT or MRI. Unfortunately, in Tacloban, we cannot do MRI if your patient is intubated. Kasi wala po tayong tawag dyan, portable McVet. So we usually just do CT. And you do CSF analysis if you're thinking about CNS infections. So what is the immediate goal of treatment? The immediate goal is to prevent further damage to the nervous system. You always check for the airway, breathing, and circulation. You correct any metabolic problems, and you can even give empiric antibiotic coverage. Of course, the others will depend on what is the problem. If there's a tumoral bleed, then you refer to neurosurgery, and they can stabilize the patient until that patient can be allowed to undergo surgery. If it's diabetic ketoacidosis, then we treat that patient with diabetic ketoacidosis. You also always check for um, possible intake of drugs, no? Mga illicit drug use, drug overdose, uh, because that's very important also. And it's a common reason that patients, especially young patients, will present to the ER with altered sensorium. Strokes are also one of the most common cause, especially if there's involvement of the brain stem. So fixed the pinpoint pupils, quadriplegic, then pons. Then you can have strokes on one side that's big, for example, malignant strokes impinging onto the left side. Then you can have weakness on the left side and then mag-anisocoria when there's already involvement of the brain stem. So that is the last slide for this topic. Any questions? Anybody? Waray? So if there is none, I'll send, anyway, it recorded naman ang lecture, so I don't need to send my PDF, okay? So remember that in patients with altered sensorium, maraming pwedeng reasons. And the simplest of that or the most common is still, it remains to be trauma and metabolic problems. So while you're doing questions, while you're asking questions, you're also doing your neuro exam. So in patients with altered sensorium, we don't do head to toe. We do um, focus neuro exam, pupils, respiration, brainstem functions, muscle movements, reflexes. Those are very important. Okay, you check for laterality, may focal deficit, because you know that if there's focal deficit, then you need to do neuroimaging ASAP, the soonest possible time. So, pero if you don't see laterality, then you have to check for metabolic problems. Remember that in patients with altered sensorium, you have to ask for trauma. Make sure there is no trauma because you should not do any maneuvers on the patient neck. Mangin ikaw ang reason mamatay hiya. Okay? Remember that high spinal fractures can present like coma gihapon. So that's very important that we make sure what a trauma before. And if you're not sure, the relative thinks there is, but I'm not sure, then cervical color, do an x-ray. Cervical color, try to intubate. We usually call the anesthesiologist to do that, no? Or they do cricothyroidectomy. So cricoid, okay? So I hope you also you're watching the pit, no? So you can get a lot from the pit nga cases nila, which really happens also at the ERs, in our ERs. So in patients with altered sensorium, number one, trauma, number two, metabolic. If there's laterality, structural. So more strokes, um, ano ba, and tawag doon, mga arteriovenous malformations, so it remains to be structural, more common. If it's sudden, stroke. If there's a chronic illness, chronic headaches, and then suddenly develop weakness, tumoral bleed, no? Or CNSI na nagvasculitis na. So I hope you learned today how to do the basic neuro exam with patients with altered sensorium. Mas gusto ko pa na you learn this, no? Okay na lang magsayop-sayop pan-neuro exam in patients who are awake because you still have the chance to go back and ask, do history and do your repeat neuro exam in patients who are awake. But in patients who are out with altered sensorium, we don't have that leeway for time. We don't have that extra time, no, to double check. You have to be fast, you have to be thorough. And so if you don't see anything in your labs, you really have to do um neuroimaging studies. And the fastest that you can do is CT scan. You can just do the MRI later if there's a question. But the basic thing that you need to do, check is the tumoral bleeds and subarachnoid bleeds and big infarcts because they will necessitate surgeries. Okay? And of course, the non-convulsive status epilepticus. What if all your tests are normal, the CT is normal, your patient remains comatose? The back of your mind is always the non-convulsive status epilepticus. Okay? So if there are no questions, good afternoon, everyone. I'll see you on Saturday. Like I told Franny, we'll just do 50 items, cranial nerves, and the cerebellum. All the rest of the topics will be included in your final exam, but I will no longer include the cranial nerves and the cerebellum in the final exams. Okay? No questions? Going once, going twice, going thrice. If there's none, bye everyone. See you on Saturday.
Thank you,
Bye,
Doc.
Doc. Thank you po.
Thank you, everyone.